I'll open.
Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning. Welcome to Ethical Perspectives in the News. My name is Pete Welch, and I'm the moderator in today's show. Today, we'd like to visit about the topic of ethical as applied to bankruptcy in today's modern society. With us first this morning is Professor Pat Bauer, who is with the University of Iowa Law School, and I believe you teach bankruptcy there, don't you? Okay, welcome. Also with us this morning is Britney Clarke, who is with the Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust Company here in Cedar Rapids, and she is going to discuss some of the commercial aspects of bankruptcy. Welcome.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Mr. Scott Shook, who's a credit counselor at Horizons here in town, and he's had where the rubber meets the road, the experience of dealing with people that are in these things. Good morning.
Morning.
First of all, Professor, one of our missions is a little bit of an educational. Can you explain a little bit about what the bankruptcy process is for businesses and individuals in kind of a quick thumbnail sketch of what things are that people would be talking about when they talk personal bankruptcy or business bankruptcies?
Both individuals and businesses have the option of a liquidation bankruptcy, which is basically putting all of the assets into a kitty and distributing as far as it will go amongst creditors, and then perhaps discharging any debt that's not satisfied. Individuals and corporations also have the possibility of rehabilitative or reorganizational proceedings, which would be Chapter 13 in the case of individuals, Chapter 11 in the case of corporations. And so one in class I've referred to as throwing in the towel, and the other one I refer to as hitching up to the plow.
Okay. An appropriate term for Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One of the things that people are familiar with is a complete bankruptcy, and what happens, what is the process? It's prioritizing different categories of creditors and things such as that.
Creditors with liens, lien on the house, lien on the car, have first claim to the value that might be in those assets. The second comes exemptions. State law provides that certain kinds of property, family Bible, burial place, homestead, tools of the trade, are exempt from claims of creditors. And if there's anything left over that isn't encumbered and isn't exempt, that would be liquidated, and the proceeds in a liquidation bankruptcy distributed to creditors.
Okay. Now, Scott, you deal day in with people that have problems and are considering bankruptcy as an option for many other things. What are the society problems that you see most with people coming in seeking credit counseling and things such as that? What are the mistakes being made?
Well, a lot of the times the people are coming in because they've got a lot of medical debt or credit card debt that they can't pay, and I think maybe what happens is they overspend, or they get into a situation where they haven't planned ahead very well, and so they find themselves in a position where they can't pay their bills and eat and provide for their family at the same time.
Now, one of the things I did is in doing a little bit of research, I looked to see where the origins of the bankruptcy laws came from. And I was surprised to learn it was in the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy, and provided for an automatic release of debt every 7 years. Isn't that true, Professor?
That's right, that is, and at some point that was cited for, it used to be that you could only file bankruptcy every 6 years. That was changed in 2005 to 8 years, but.
Certainly, it's been around for quite a while. Brittany, what do you see in the commercial banking? It's people, having been a banker in a former life myself, people come in and at a commercial bank, you make loans and you do things like that. And then what's the process that you go about to avoid? Because most people think, oh gosh, I'm getting money from a bank, no big deal. But in fact, you're loaning out other depositors money.
Right. I work on the consumer side, and so I have a lot of clients come in, and maybe they have filed for bankruptcy in the past, and they have a lot of questions about that and getting loans. And if they've maybe looked on the internet and it tells them something, they're kind of looking for answers in that case. But really, it's case by case with everybody that comes in to the bank, and a lot of people have questions on how to restart once they've filed for bankruptcy and how to build their credit back up, and so we assist them with that.
And one of your functions really is a testing of, making credit judgment of, it used to be cash, collateral, character.
Character, capacity, and
Character,
collateral.
capacity.
Yep.
He knows it well. But it involves judgment and decision making on whether you're going to be able to get your depositors' money back that you loan out. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, and we do look at the entire situation with each individual client. It's going to be different. A lot of people do a lot of work to try to rebuild their credit after the fact. Some people just don't know where to start.
Scott, you brought forward just a couple of instances of how somebody can be making or getting into bankruptcy or considering. Mm-hmm. One of those you said was illnesses or family catastrophe, medical.
Sure.
Another would be somebody who was self-indulgent and maybe overextended on credit cards. Herein lies the ethical dilemma. Mm-hmm. Does the family that happens accidentally because of a medical condition, is it ethical that they get the same out from the person that's overindulgent?
That is a good question. And with bankruptcy going back to the Bible, I think probably the intention of bankruptcy was to help the people that got into a financial situation because the situation's out of their control. And they certainly, that's why the bankruptcy laws are there now. And I definitely think they deserve a little more consideration, maybe than someone that hasn't managed the money as well as they could. As a credit counselor, we certainly think people should pay their bills when they can pay their bills and not use bankruptcy as an out, but more as a tool to get on a corrected path if they've had some problems that they really couldn't avoid. A job layoff, a medical problem, something like that.
Britney, what do you think? Do you get into any of the ethical considerations on making these loans?
Yes, I guess I agree with that, to the fact of, from being a community banker, I do know a lot of my clients, and we do discuss situations. There's always a reason why these debts have accumulated. A lot of times we do see a lot of medical debt on people's and credit reports, and we go through the process of helping them get that cleared up. If it was, bankruptcy filed because of that, we can usually see that, and we discuss that with them at that point.
Okay. Professor, how do you approach when you teach this topic in law school? What is it, do the students accept that bankruptcy is something that's a necessary evil, or it's a specialty clearly in law?
Right, and I usually make the point that bankruptcy doesn't cause the problem. Bankruptcy is a symptom of other problems, and bankruptcy can be the solution to those other problems. Medical debt has been mentioned. You either have too much debt or not enough income. And a large number of bankruptcies involve the so-called income shock, where someone loses their job and they hold on and they try their best, hoping to turn things around, and they dip into their retirement savings and they liquidate their assets. The empirical studies that have been done since the 2005 Act, I think, established pretty clearly that the 99% of people filing bankruptcy are in an unmanageable, hopeless situation.
Okay, now the credit card companies were largely the supporters and the drafters of Was this the 2005
Five.
revision? And weren't they the ones that by and large created their own problem they tried to solve when they made obtaining credit cards so easy?
Right.
And so is there an ethical issue here?
On both sides, I think someone who borrows in the face of of being unable to pay has an ethical problem. I think creditors that extend credit without making an assessment of I always feel like such an old guy talking about character, capacity, and collateral, because that was thrown to the winds in the subprime lending boom. A lot of banks did very, very well by kind of extending credit willy-nilly and on basically a portfolio basis, figuring that if they got 20% from people who paid, they could take their hits on the ones who weren't able to pay.
For example, the ones that were in the finance companies that had the attitude about get them in debt and keep them in debt forever.
Right. Payday lenders, title pawn. One of the theories that's been advanced is the sweatbox theory, that the purpose of the 2005 Act was to make bankruptcy, create various hoops that had to be jumped through, increase the price of bankruptcy in terms of representation, and that it wasn't, things weren't going to turn around. You were just going to get more money out of people for the additional 4 or 6 months they stayed at it, trying to turn things around before they finally realized it was hopeless.
Scott, have you seen any changes or trends? Is it gotten, there's more people looking, there's less people, or is it the same, or?
Well, I think we're seeing, and I think nationwide, there's a downtrend in the number of people filing bankruptcy. I think that's probably because the creditors have tightened up their credit policies, and people have maybe been a little more cautious since the housing crisis and the financial bottoming out here a while ago. So we still see a fair number of people that have financial problems that maybe they can resolve. You know, a lot of times what happens is people get into financial problems and then they make sort of knee-jerk reactions to get out of those problems. And some of that is, sometimes it's bankruptcy, sometimes it's going to a payday loan or taking a subprime mortgage, or using a financial institution that isn't quite on the up and up, and so that just gets them further and further into difficulty, and that's when we start to see them come in, is when they've kind of looked at all their options that they can take, and they don't see any way out, and then they come to us. We certainly like to see them before that, and we see a fair number of people that come in because they just want to improve their budgeting skills or their credit management skills. But most of the time when they come in, they've had some financial difficulty that they've tried to correct, and it really hasn't worked out as well as they'd hoped.
Okay, now one of the other things, like, for example, Britney, being a commercial banker or consumer banker, people come in with ideas and they've got a startup business, and you at the bank would say, okay, well, bring us your business plan, tell us what you're going to do. But there really are no guarantees that somebody has this idea and thinks it's going to be a great business. There's still a pretty high kill ratio among startup businesses, 65, maybe 75%. And isn't bankruptcy the only way these things are going to get cleaned up when those ideas fail or the businesses go?
Well, as far as startup businesses, I don't do startup loans myself personally. I know that there's a lot tied with collateral to those types of loans, so there is somewhat of a cushion on those, and they're not as risky in that sense, or maybe they use the equity in their home or something like that, so they're feeling very strongly about their lending ability.
Yeah.
It is interesting. I think there's a very different reaction to the appropriateness of bankruptcy for someone who's tried and failed at a business versus what we call consumer bankruptcies. I think they generate very different and strongly different reactions in a way that I think is kind of unusual.
Well, what's interesting is when you tell people that bankruptcies allow people to bring up new ideas and go and do better things, that guess who? Henry Ford, Walt Disney took bankruptcies. And then they came back out with other ideas, and those other ideas they brought up, and it was the bankruptcies that allowed them to go forward and do do another plan and start it, and those legacies are with us today. Matter of fact, we've had 3 presidents, Abraham Lincoln twice, and Lincoln has still got his hands on the government. I mean, so people might jump to this thing of bankruptcy is a bad thing, but it's also a revitalizing regrowth, isn't that right?
And there have been studies which show both between nations and between states that entrepreneurial activity is higher in jurisdictions that have a mechanism in place to deal with failure. If there was no way out from failure, people wouldn't take chances. The fact that bankruptcy is there is kind of a safety net of sorts that, again, you're not going to get rich filing bankruptcy, but you'll get that fresh start. You'll get a second try. And people frequently learn things the first time around, and they avoid those difficulties the next time around.
And it's a capitalist way of putting it, but that's kind of the entrepreneur's spirit that's made the private markets move. Isn't that, Scott? Haven't you seen some of that?
Absolutely. We don't do a lot with business bankruptcies, but certainly people are taking more and more risks. And I think, you know, we've seen a change in the perception of bankruptcy over the years. It used to be kind of the big taboo, nobody should do it, and if you did it, it just destroyed your credit. And I think that's evolved now to the point where it's more acceptable, and it's not quite as damaging to your credit in the long. I mean, it's certainly in the short term, but you know, after 24, 36 months, you can buy a house or anything. Probably you can buy a car right after that if you want to, but the interest rates are going to be really high. But to get back into the mainstream credit, it's going to take a couple years. But whereas it used to take 10 years, you know. So.
Well, I think there's a lot of trends in business that are changing. It used to be that you'd have one employer for life.
Right.
It used to be that you wouldn't move from job to job. And you know, the way of business and the startups, clearly the internet and the publishing, these very small companies have made a completely different atmosphere going forward.
And the line between consumer and commercial is very, very muddy in the small business startup situation, where people have been working for the man and have a dozen credit cards, and they use the cash advance on those credit cards to start their business. You just have to go in and see a commercial banker and present a business plan. Mm-hmm. At this point, you just pull the cash advance off 10 cards and take a shot at it. Yeah. Small business people frequently personally guarantee. They may be incorporated, but most of the bank debt's going to be personally guaranteed. So that when a small business does fail, it'll show up as personal debt rather than corporate debt in a lot of the record keeping.
Mm-hmm. Scott, for those that are watching our show this morning, what are the resources available for people that wanted? I mean, clearly there's yourself and you work with others. What other resources are available in the community?
Well, if someone's experiencing financial difficulty, there's all kinds of community resources that are available to help them with food and legal assistance through Iowa Legal Aid and you know, just housing resources. There's a lot of organizations now that are working with the housing crisis and the housing situation, trying to make housing more affordable for people.
So you're doing financial counseling at Horizons.
Right.
Housing can be pay cap and others.
Sure.
Okay. Sure. And where do people go to get those? Is that by? They've got to call the agency.
Probably the easiest thing to do if you need some financial help is to call United Way's 211 number, and they'll hook you up with with all the right resources based on what your situation is. If you need help with rent or rental deposit or utilities, they can put you in touch with the people that provide those services. As far as we're concerned, we certainly work with anybody that's got some financial difficulty that wants to look at alternatives to bankruptcy. You know, there are alternatives to bankruptcy in a lot of cases. Some of those aren't as realistic for people the further down the line they get in their financial distress. So.
Okay, and Britney, you also, one of the functions that the consumer bankers have and the community bankers is also for the community, and And you also end up being resources, aren't you?
Yeah, a lot of times we help with some credit counseling as well as lenders, because a lot of people will come to us for a loan and they maybe have never seen their credit report before, or they haven't seen it in years, and there's medical bills that they don't understand, or a lot of things on there that they don't understand how to read. And so we've taught our lenders to be able to help them find that information. If they do need further help, I usually send them to Horizons too, as well.
And I would say that for people that are in financial trouble, probably one of the greatest resources is their financial institution and the person that they're indebted to, and just talk to them, tell them what's going on. And a lot of times, you know, banks don't want to take back cars or houses or anything.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways to work things out before that sort of catastrophic event happens. So.
Yeah. People have to remember banks are in the business to lend money. They'd like to lend money.
Exactly.
You just need to, you know, the stars need to align.
Your primary business is not to resell repossessed assets.
Right.
It's not an efficient function. So, and part of that, of what I'm hearing you say, Scott, is communication with who you're working with.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, the lender doesn't know you're in trouble unless you tell them. They don't have a magic ball there to look into.
Yeah, they're going to be a lot more apt to work with you if you communicate with them your situation.
In a way, it's just like parents. They don't like their kids to surprise them.
Yeah, exactly.
Professor, what would you say would be the most valuable that you could put out to our viewers this morning about what the process is and how people should be thinking about it in terms of their own planning? It just kind of getting their financial affairs in order to understand what's out there to assist?
I suppose the most helpful advice would be, as Scott mentioned, kind of addressing your difficulties early, not waiting until things become totally hopeless. Be it credit counseling, the earlier experts, outsiders get involved and help you bring that objectivity to your circumstances. I think more options are available to you. There's more opportunity for creative solutions. If you just keep kicking the can down the road thinking that something's going to change, the situation will just become more adverse.
Kicking the can down the road. Gee, we use that in Washington, D.C. a lot for the way Congress acts. You talked about when they spend down, they take out what they've got and get down to no assets left, and then they begin thinking, should they jump on it earlier while they still have assets in their retirement accounts?
Certainly.
Does it make a lot of sense?
Part of the ethics, the counseling that a debtor might receive from bankruptcy attorney would be you have ethical responsibilities that aren't limited to your creditors. You have ethical responsibilities to your family. And if you're in a situation where there's unmanageable debt that's adversely affecting the marriage, that's adversely affecting the atmosphere around the home, it may well be that taking the bull by the horns and facing up to the need for a bankruptcy might provide a fresh start that would allow you to do better by those who are depending upon you.
Do you have any sense for what our bankruptcy courts here in Iowa have been? Have we been busier than the rest of the country, or about the same?
We're in the bottom third. I think we're number 34 or 35 in terms of per capita filings. So in Iowa, I looked this afternoon, I think we have about 3 filings per 1,000 persons. I also think that the abuses that the credit card companies touted in getting the 2005 legislation through weren't particularly centered in the Midwest. I think both our lenders, our bankruptcy courts, our U.S. trustee, there's kind of a Midwestern sensibility to how we deal with these situations that I think avoids some of the abusive situations that you might have in a larger metropolitan area where people don't know each other the way we do in our communities.
Now, Britney, I think the community banks have come out real strong in these last 2 years. So, the Iowa banks have been much safer and better. Isn't that something that in your own bank statistics have been good?
Yeah, I think as far as helping people with debt consolidation and helping out the community in general when they have bankruptcy or debt issues, yeah.
Okay. Scott, what do you think is going to, high interest rates, if the economy turns, right now people are forecasting the stock market's hit a new high probably 5 times within the last 30 days, and everybody's feeling really good. Their accounts look good. What happens if we have another adjustment, market-wise? Interest rates begin going up, and people begin to get gloomy. Are we going to repeat the mistakes of the past?
Well, I would hope not. And unfortunately, I think because of the past, there are fewer options for people if there is a recession or the economy goes down the tubes, because they've taken all the equity out of their homes, and they've cashed in their retirement, and they were already working 2 jobs or whatever, and so any adjustment in the economy is definitely going to have a negative effect on just the whole process of the economy and financial well-being for people. So.
Just a basic ripple effect. I mean, you can't be an island these days.
No, right. That's right.
Back when I was in banking, I can remember when bank would be making loans on farmland that was $3,000 an acre, and it went down to 1. Well, imagine what it would be now if it went down to 3. Everybody would be screaming. And we've got a couple minutes left. Any professor, would you like to
following up on your last question, I think that the national statistics show that the shock of the 2008-2009 housing bubble bursting led to a more cautious approach, and that a lot of people have been paying down their debts, that the overall consumer indebtedness that was rising through the 2000s has been kind of trending downwards for the past 4 or 5 years, so that may make a cutback in the economy a little bit more manageable because people aren't carrying the levels of debt. The interest rate factor you mentioned, to the extent that these are adjustable rate, could be work the other way.
It's, as you know, if we could forecast what the economy would do, I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here having to worry about earning a living. But certainly, it is a nature of the economy that it can
up and down,
or back and forth pendulum. Any final thoughts?
I guess kind of what Patrick said. If you do find yourself in this situation, face it head on. It's not going to go away. As far as from a banking perspective, communicate with your lender. Let them know the situation. There are resources out there to help. So.
Anything final, Scott?
Well, bad things happen to good people, and that's really the whole meat of the matter, I think. And bankruptcy is certainly an option when that happens, but I think there's things people can do before that, like talk to their lender, look at what some of their other assets are, some of the resources they might have to take care of that debt before they file bankruptcy. But it certainly is there to be used as a tool in the appropriate situation.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you all 3 for joining me this morning, and thank you very much. And on behalf of Ethical Perspectives of the News, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and go out there and make our community a better place today for us all.